Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to look at the studio output of none other than Tom Petty, from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Tom was born in Gainesville, Florida in the Deep South, and formed the band Mudcrutch with Ben Montench on keyboards and Mike Campbell on guitar. Along the way they recruited Ron Blair on bass and Stan Lynch on drums and headed out west, where they got a deal with Shelter Records and released their first album in 1976 as Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. They've made 16 albums, 3 are solo albums, but the quality control is very, very high. We're going to come back to this point over and over again because even the worst of these records is very, very enjoyable and very listenable. But let's get straight into it. At number 16, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, from 1987, their 7th album. This kind of the sound of a band treading water. The single Jamming Me is very enjoyable. There's a couple of Bob Dylan co-writes. The band always sounds good and plays well. But I think the album is probably lacking in some of those big killer choruses that Tom is so good at. But nonetheless, an enjoyable record. Number 15, Long After Dark from 1982, their 5th album. They had really hit their stride with some great rock records, and I think they wanted to change direction a little bit. So this album is a bit more heavier on keyboards and synthesizers. Again, the big single, You Got Lucky, is very, very enjoyable, and the rest of the record very, very listenable, but it's not really the true Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers sound. Number 14, 1996, their 11th album. This is music from the motion picture She's the One, a film that came out starring Jennifer Aniston. No, I don't remember it either. But the soundtrack is very enjoyable. Tom sounds like he's having a good time writing music without the restraints of a studio record. This is the freedom that a soundtrack gives you. The single Walls is great. It's got Lindsey Buckingham on backing vocals with a very interesting BV arrangement, which sort of pops off all over the place. But very light, very listenable record. Number 13 for their 16th album from 2014, Hypnotic Eye. This was sadly Tom Petty's last record. Tom Petty died from a sudden heart attack in 2017, and I think it shocked a lot of people and has saddened a great many people because Tom Petty holds a special place in the hearts of music lovers, rock music lovers. He was always one of the good guys. He was campaigning against high record prices, high concert ticket prices, and you'd be very hard pressed to find anybody who has a bad word to say about him. I was very happy that I saw one of their last shows in Hyde Park that summer. Hypnotic Eye is not the greatest Tom Petty record. It's not a bad record at all. It does lack a lot of those nice big choruses and hooks, but lyrically it's great and the playing is, as always, fantastic. Number 12 from 1999, their 12th album, Echo. Again, this is a bit of a curio. It's neither the greatest Tom Petty record nor the worst, but it's very, very listenable, enjoyable. It's got a couple of oddities on it, not least I Don't Want to Fight, which is sung by Mike Campbell. Not much else to say because it's got Top of the World, which is a lovely song. But again, there were no massive hits from this one. From number 11, You're Gonna Get It, their 2nd album from 1978. This is a band really kind of, you can hear them just getting better and better, getting more and more confident. This has got some really, really killer songs on it. Listen to Her Heart, I Need to Know. Tom had already written some great songs on the first album, and they just carried on coming. And this is very much more of the same from the first record, and that's no bad thing at all. Number 10 from 2010, their 15th album, Mojo. The Heartbreakers had clearly at this point decided they were going to sort of stretch their instrumental legs a little bit. So there's lots of jams on this record. It's quite a bluesy record as well. And you can hear Mike Campbell, exercising his inner Jimmy Page, which is no bad thing. One of the best tracks is First Flash of Freedom, and you can really hear him do it on there. So again, no huge singles from this one, but the playing is magnificent, and it's a record you could just turn up on the radio and just enjoy the sound of it. They always sound great. From number 9 from 2002, their 13th album, The Last DJ. This is a really interesting record because this was a concept album. This is a concept album Tom wrote about the death of music on the radio and rock and roll music dying and the place it had in people's hearts and all that sort of thing. But it backfired because all the DJs and the radio stations, I mean, they thought it was a cuss against them. So it got very, very little radio play, but it's really, really good. There's some great stuff on here. It's a brilliant story, very enjoyable. Tom writes very matter-of-factly, very easy to follow, you know, for dimwits like me. And it's and it's one of his least talked about records, but actually one of his most interesting. Number 8 from 2006, his 14th album, Highway Companion. This is the first of the solo albums in this list. And, you know, there's just nothing out of place on this record at all. Nothing at all. Now, you might think that's a little bit boring, that everything sounds in its right place. But that's what Tom Petty does. He just makes everything sound effortless. There's not a bad song in here. There's not a bad vocal. In fact, Tom Petty never delivered a bad vocal. There's not a note out of place. You know, and some people might find that a little bit clinical. But the performances are so good and the songwriting is so good that you just have to sit back and just enjoy it. Number 7, Into the Great Wide Open from 1991, their 9th album. Now this is an interesting one because it came off the back of Full Moon Fever, which Tom Petty had recorded with Jeff Lynne, and Jeff Lynne had a very different way of recording. Usually the Heartbreakers would record live, but Tom wanted him back to record this at the follow-up to Full Moon Fever, and Jeff Lynne likes to layer things one after the other, which I think the Heartbreakers found a very tedious process. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Heartbreaker who speaks highly of this record, because I think they all found it very, very difficult. But that said, it's got some great songs on it. Into the Great Wide Open, Two Gunslingers. The proof is in the pudding. I think it's a really, really good record. Yes, it sounds a bit Beatlesy. It sounds a bit ELO-y, but that's no bad thing, is it? Number 6 from 1981, their 4th album, Hard Promises. As I was saying, this is now the sound of a band really in its stride. This is another great record they've made on the bounce. It's got The Waiting on it, which is a fantastic song. The song itself, Hard Promises. If anything, the sound of the snare on this record is a little bit fat for me, which we can blame Jimmy Iovine about, but more of that later. But again, the consistency of his songwriting is just, you have to sit back and admire it, because his quality threshold is so high that he just very, very rarely puts a bad song on an album. At number 5 from 1985, the 6th album, Southern Accents. I love this record. There's always a record in these lists that I just especially warm to, and it might not necessarily be the top record, but just a record I feel very close to. Tom Petty was going through a lot of hard times with this record. His house had burned down. He'd broken his hand in frustration during recording. And Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics had come in as producer and kind of really sort of thrown the cat amongst the pigeons with ideas and drum machines and synthesizers and all kinds of things. And there are some brilliant songs on here. Don't Come Around Here No More was the big hit, but also you've got lovely things like Southern Accents. You've got grooves like It Ain't Nothing to Me. A lot of people don't like this record. They just find it just too all over the place, and it doesn't seem to have an identity. But for me, its identity is kind of mischievous and cheeky, and it's a very interesting album to have in his oeuvre. In his oeuvre? I'm not sure I've used that word before. I'm not sure I'll use it again. In his canon. That's the easy way of saying it. Number 4, their first album from 1976, their debut album, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers couldn't get arrested in America, so they came to England on the back of the punk movement, and Tom had a leather jacket on the cover, and for some reason the punks saw this and just thought, well, he's one of us, and they took them into their fold. They took the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers into their fold, and this became something of a minor hit. Its quality, has lasted longer than the sort of punk movement and everything. It's now regarded as something of a debut classic. It's got, of course, American Girl, which is a brilliant song. It's got Breakdown on it, and again, every single song on here is great. You can hear that this is a band who are around to stay, and they rocked too. There's some really good live footage of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers from the same period. Number 3 from 1979, their third album, Damn the Torpedoes. This was the big one. This was the Motherlode. This was the album that put the band right into the A-list. He was having all sorts of problems with the record company at the time, and they were threatening to leave or not make the record. So this record famously came out during a time of some kind of inner turmoil for for Tom Petty, but God, did they deliver. It was produced by Jimmy Iovine, who is now one of the most powerful and richest people in the music business, having sold Beats headphones to Apple. But he was kind of a little sort of upstart at the time who wanted to get his foot into the music business and do some producing. And he got his opportunity on this record, and gosh, did he deliver. This band, you know, the sound of the record is great. It's rich. The guitars chime, the drums thud and thwack, and the vocals sound great. Famously, Jimmy Iovine had a Barney with drummer Stan Lynch, and Stan Lynch eventually left. But you know, the drums sound fantastic on here. And the songwriting, you've got Refugee, which is the huge big hit, and you've got Don't Do Me Like That, which is a brilliant song, Century City, Here Comes My Girl. Again, just one great song after another. Number 2 from 1984, Tom's 10th album, and this was his second solo album, Wildflowers. This is a beautiful record. Now, it's quite a long record. It's 15 songs long, and I think it's over an hour. And if you've watched these videos before, you know I don't tend to warm to records that long. But as I've said before, just the quality of the songwriting is so high and so consistent, so even all the way throughout, that he gets away with it more than others do. The title track Wildflowers is really sweet and lovely, and indicative of the sort of real organic warmth and sound all the way through this record. It's Good to Be King, Honeybee, songs that he still plays live a lot, and that's always a measure of a great record, when you're still playing songs that weren't hits live many years later. But my number 1 Tom Petty record is his first solo album from 1989, and the 8th record he made, Full Moon Fever. I mean, this is just a brilliant record, people. Do you know, I defy you to not put this record on and sing at the top of your voice, or tap a toe, or drum along, or want to get in the car and just put your foot down and drive at no more than 70 miles an hour, or 55 if you're watching in America. This is absolutely the definition of all killer, no filler. Every song on here is a joy to listen to. This is a man absolutely at the top of his songwriting game. You've got, of course, Running Down a Dream, I Won't Back Down, and the utterly peerless Free Falling, one of the greatest pop rock songs I think written in the last 3-4 decades. Gosh, it's a lot of decades now, isn't it? Gosh. Still, my point still stands. He, on his solo albums, he still roped in Benmont Tench on keyboards from the Heartbreakers, who is one of the greatest keyboard session players in America, incredibly in demand, and Mike Campbell, one of the greatest unsung guitar heroes there is. Mike Campbell now, of course, is in Fleetwood Mac with Neil Finn, as they both replaced the outgoing Lindsey Buckingham, who was fired a couple of years ago. But back to Full Moon Fever. It went on to sell millions and millions of copies, and rightly so. You can absolutely hear why, because the choruses are enormous. The playing is fantastic and exciting. When the band rocks, it's invigorating and joyous. And when he pulls it down, everything's in the right place, and the mood and the vibe is as should be. Famously, this has the voiceover at halfway through, where it says, "Hello, CD listeners. If you're listening, now's the time to turn over the record." If you know, that's the worst Tom Petty impression you'll ever hear. But that's just a little insight into Tom's sense of humour. Anyway, that is my Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers rundown. I'm sure you don't agree, but if you don't, do say so in the comments below, and we can discuss it. But until another Rock Records reviewed soon, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.